Good day and welcome to the BMC Connect with Control M using BIM webinar. Today's call is being recorded. At this time, I'd like to turn the conference over to Mr. Eric Rudy. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. Welcome everyone to Connect with Control M. I'm very glad you're able to take time out of your busy day today to join us in this webinar series with the Control M support team. My name is Eric Rudy, as you mentioned, and I have been with BMC supporting Control M for about 14 years now. Today we will be discussing Batch Impact Manager, also known as BIM. So for today's agenda, we will have a brief overview of BIM, talk about some of the implementation steps. We'll have a demonstration of some of the basic capabilities of BIM, and then we'll follow that up with a review and talk about some of the new features. And then finally, we'll have a Q&A session to answer any questions you have. So at any time, though, please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A panel to the right, and we will get to them after the presentation is done. So BIM is an add-on to Enterprise Manager that lets you monitor critical job flows and then intervene if there are any delays or problems. So instead of monitoring potentially hundreds of jobs, there really is only one job needed to monitor the entire service. So a BIM service itself comprises all of the jobs that exist above a BIM job to the point that there are no longer any in conditions. So in this example here at the bottom, the Finance 13, this is the most critical job that must complete by a certain time. So we'd create a BIM job below that, and then any jobs above it linked by conditions comprise the service. So that's what defines what a service is. So without BIM, we'd really have to manually calculate all the different times and dependencies between your jobs. But BIM does this for us automatically, so that's a really great feature. So we first need to identify then which is the most critical job. Again, here at the bottom, we have the job that is the most critical, must end by a certain time, and so that's the job that must complete and would be affected most by anything above it. What we need to do, though, then is create a job specifically of type Batch Impact Manager as opposed to SAP or something like an OS job, and then link it via condition. And again, the jobs above that are what defines what the service is. So in any service, as you can imagine, some jobs are critical and others are not. In this example here to the right, we see a job called Finance 10, and this is not critical. And so in this example, although it's failed, it doesn't have an impact on the completion of a service. And so BIM takes that into account, and the job has failed, and there's no it creates an alert, but there's really no reason to alert the service in that sense. The BIMServer component is running in the CCM, the configuration manager, and its purpose then is to analyze the performance of this set of jobs that you've defined in a service, and it calculates whether it's going to end on time or there might be any sort of problems. What it really does behind the scenes is it traverses backwards from the bottom where the BIM job exists and then follows the flow until there are no more in conditions. So if a service is problematic, like potentially here with job number 4, with finance number 4, this particular job can potentially make the service late. And based upon that, we can then perform one of many actions in the BIM job, such as sending an email or creating an alert or opening a remedy ticket and all that. And we'll see that here in a moment. We can then monitor the services as a whole from the Workload Automation GUI. And in the demonstration, we're going to be using version 8. And so for those of you who haven't had a chance to see that, this will be a good chance to see that. In previous versions, 700 and below, it's just in the Enterprise Manager GUI where you're looking at the AJF. Or you can use a web user interface. There's a BIM specific interface, and then there's also, for those of you who have self-service, there's a web interface there. So, and we'll talk about that here in a few moments then. Finally then, BIM, as it's doing all these calculations for this service, for this set of jobs, it has to make certain assumptions. And there are certain default assumptions, but you can alter these or create your own assumptions. So the first assumption relates to external conditions, and BIM assumes that all external conditions are added at the average start time of a job that waits for the condition. So what that means is the job is going to start basically at its average time. Nothing simple. I mean, we just have to make that assumption to be able to know how a service is running. Confirmation jobs. So, you can create a job that has a manual confirmation. So by default, BIM assumes that any job needing manual confirmation is not confirmed. So you kind of have to take that into account. And again, we can create rules within BIM to handle that if you want to skip that natural assumption. Jobs that end not okay. We assume, again, that a rerun is performed at the current time. And so only when the latest possible start time is reached for that job will it send an alert for the service. So just the fact that a job fails doesn't necessarily mean that the service is problematic in some way. It's only when that latest possible time is reached are we going to alert on the service side. And then finally, jobs with no statistics. As you can imagine, you add new jobs into a service or into the stream, and if it hasn't run before, there's obviously no statistics, and BIM is highly needing to use statistics in part of its calculation. So for a job with no statistics, we're going to assume that the average runtime is 5 minutes, and then the average start time of that job is at new day time. So that can potentially affect the service itself. So at a high level, to implement BIM, you need to be licensed for it, and you can check with your sales rep if you don't know whether you're licensed for it, and then you can download it from the EPD site on BIMC.com. And then obviously we need to install it, and it specifically goes on the Enterprise Manager server host. Really the installation is just a license enabler. It's not installing any new code. And then in the Configuration Manager, obviously we need to create the BIMServer component and start it, and then it can do its calculations. And finally, again, we need to create that BIM job. So let's take a look at how this works now, and let me jump over to the demo environment, and we can see how things look in version 8. So here in the Configuration Manager, it's going to look the same between all the other versions, but we've got the BIMServer component. I've already gone through the installation, enabled the license, created the component, and I've got it running. So just a quick look at the component itself. The main things about it are the GUI server name. If you've got more than one GUI server, you might have environments that are larger, and so you've distributed GUI server over different, multiple GUI servers over different locations. So what you can do is point the BIM server to a different GUI server than the default. What the BIM server is doing is it's connecting to the GUI server to get the all jobs viewpoint. So it's able to see all of the jobs in the environment across all the different control M servers. So that's really what it's kind of doing behind the scenes. And then the BIM name is simply just an alias name. Typically you're going to use it only in cluster situations. The other main component here, just to note, I talked about using a web user interface. So if you want to use that, and typically where you're going to use that is for users who don't have Control M installed. They might not have a client installed, but you still want them to be able to see services. So we need this web server running, and the default port there is 18080. But if you want to have the web user interface, you need to connect there. And then just a quick look at some of the system parameters. There's quite a few related to BIM, so definitely not going to go over all of these, but just two quick ones I want to mention. If you want to use BIM to send emails as alert, you just need to set up these two parameters here, the email sender and then the email server. Email server obviously is where your emails server's located, the host name of that, and then the sender is whatever email you want to specifically send BIM alerts when there are service problems. So let's go over here to the Workload Automation client. Again, this is version 8, so for those of you who haven't seen it, it's got a little bit different look and feel. Where we manage jobs, in previous versions it was Control-M Desktop. So we have this concept here in version 8 of a domain bar. So on the left here, I'm looking at the planning domain. And this is, again, this is the equivalent of Control-M Desktop. So I've got some jobs set up already. As you can imagine, as you guys know, that your job flows are going to be potentially very complex. So this example here is somewhat basic, but we want to take a look at some of the features of specifically a BIM job. So I've got a series of jobs here. Some of them are critical, some of them are not. For example, this store data is not critical, so it doesn't link again to the very end. So in this particular example, the deposits report job is the one that's the most critical. So I've created a BIM job below it. So notice the BIM icon here versus just a regular OS icon here. So if we take a look, I'm going to go ahead and check out this workspace here in the planning domain, and we can just take a look at some of the properties of a BIM job. Notice here again, it's specifically job type batch impact manager. That's what signals the BIM server to then traverse backwards. So this is our key here. And then the service name, obviously any name you want to give it, it's an alias or something that represents what the service does. We need to define when the service must complete. So we have a couple options here. It needs to complete by a specific time, and that could even be one or more days into the future, the current day, or one or more days into the future, or it needs to complete in a certain amount of time. And this particular one, we've got it set up, we're giving it quite a bit of lead time here, so 2300 tomorrow is when it must complete by. And then for times when a service might be late or have problems, we can set up different actions as far as when or what we want to do if there's a problem. So in this particular example here, I've set it up when there's a failure on the service path, and we'll talk about the service path here in just a moment. I'm going to send out an alert. But there are obviously different things that I can do or check for. So if a service is late, if a specific job runs too long, or maybe or jobs run too quickly, there might be situations where maybe a backup job is running and it normally takes a couple hours. It might take just, if it runs in a few minutes, then that's going to be a problem for this service. So we want to alert on that. And then based upon what we want to check for, we can do different things. So in this particular example, I'm going to send out a notification, meaning I'm going to send an alert to the enterprise manager or to the alerts window. But you can do things, send emails, open remedy tickets, or do one of various different other actions. You can even extend the deadline or the due time of the service if you know that that's what you want to do in this specific case. So, and then the message, there's going to be default messages come up, and these are system parameters that we didn't take a look at, but they come up by default. But obviously you can put anything you want. In the default for failure on the service path in this case is it's going to list the problematic jobs of the service. And so you'll notice that this is in the old versions it's called an auto edit variable, or just a variable here in version 8. And this is, if you hit F1, the function key 1 in the GUI at any time, you'll get up the help, and you can search on that, and you can get some of the other specific variables that might be available. So, all right, we'll go ahead and order this service real quickly and then take a look and see some of the tools that we can use to analyze what's going on with the service. So I'm going to right-click on the folder level, go ahead and click order. There weren't any changes made to this specific workspace, so I'll go ahead and order it out. The again, in version 8, if we go here to the monitoring domain to the left, this is the equivalent in version 700 and earlier of the Enterprise Manager GUI. So this is where we can look at different viewpoints and analyze our jobs. So in this case, I've got the all active viewpoint loaded up. I'm going to go ahead and expand everything so that we can see the service. In this particular case, we see that the job is the first job in the flow is waiting for confirmation. But if we wanted to get more information about a service, again, we can go to the service monitor. I've got that open here already, but in your viewpoint, you could just click on Tools and then go to Service Monitor as well to get there. So if we take a look at the Service Monitor, one of the things that we really need to be aware of with BIM is that, again, it's doing its calculations by default every minute, every 60 seconds. So even though the jobs might be going, the calculations do take some time to make sure that we understand when the start time of a job might occur, and so we have to just be aware to give it a little bit of time and go ahead and refresh in here. So in this case, we're looking at the service monitor. We see that the service is going to be late, and some very useful information coming up here. The estimate to completion time in this particular case is it's not going to complete. Again, if you recall, we talked about different assumptions that BIM makes to start with. So we can, in the service monitor, we can click and see what the current assumptions are affecting a service. So a very good tool to use when you see that a service might be late or have some other problem. So as we see, this particular assumption is in play. So I said earlier that we assume that a job that needs confirmation is not going to be confirmed, and here we see this particular assumption listed, and this one is defined by system. We can create, again, our own rules in that case. So I can either click here to create my own rules. If I wanted to do that, this is a very valuable and very useful thing to do. If you know that a particular service has certain characteristics that even though BIM calculates it as being late or not going to finish on time, then we can create rules here. Pardon me. The different rules that we can create are related to confirmation, condition, runtime. Again, because services can be quite complex, I'm not going to set anything specifically up here, but I want to encourage you to take a look at these rules and see, based upon the types of things that you might be seeing in your services, what types of rules I can create to help the service complete without any interaction if that's appropriate. Another very useful tool is looking at the analysis viewpoint, what we call the business service analysis viewpoint. So in the service monitor, I can either right-click on a service or I can just go up here and click analysis, but we'll right-click on it and open up the service analysis viewpoint. So this is just another viewpoint specifically meant to give us information about the chosen service. We talked about the critical path a little bit earlier, and while we're going to talk about that, I want to go ahead and just confirm this job so we can see some further actions on what's going on with it. But we talked about the critical path, and what that is, it defines the shortest amount of time that jobs need to run in a service that might potentially affect the end time of a service. So in this particular example here, the icon here indicating that it's a BIM job, but also with this red exclamation indicates that these jobs are all part of the critical path, meaning every job here has the potential, if it doesn't run on time, to affect when the service itself runs. So to be able to, in more complex services, what you can do in the service viewpoint is filter on this critical path. So if I had, maybe I have hundreds of jobs and I only want to see the most critical jobs that will affect the service, I can filter on this critical path here, and so it'll redisplay the service. So in this particular example here, again, what we noticed is the first job executed once we confirmed it. These next two jobs attempted to execute, but the second one failed. But the next job continued. So even though this was part of the critical path, it didn't ultimately affect the service itself. And we didn't get any sort of alert on that. So that's a good thing in this case. So if we go back to the service monitor, again, it's trying to catch up here a little bit, but what we see is that the service is okay because those jobs continue to run down their path, and then we eventually hit a failure. Again, the thing to note is BIM is not a real-time service. It's not going to be able to calculate these things extremely quickly, because the more services you get, it's going to have to perform calculations on every single job until it can get down to calculating when the service itself will complete. Some other things that are very helpful are looking at the time gap here. This is relating to when jobs, let's click on that here, when the shortest amount of time that a job is going to, when a job completes, and then the shortest amount of time that its predecessors reach that completion point. So the critical path then is the jobs that all have the shortest time gap. We can highlight time gaps here. In this particular case, this was the job. It's already complete, so it's not helpful as we've gone through this service. But so again, looking at service assumptions is a very valuable thing to do. At the moment, this particular service doesn't have any assumptions anymore. The confirmation assumption is now passed, but if you had other assumptions, maybe relating to a condition that isn't going to get created for a job, which then affects the service as a whole, that might be something to really take a look at. One of the other very useful things is just being able to update the deadline. If you know for some reason that a job is okay, that it's in a certain state, you can change the deadline for the service and just increase that time here. Again, we've given this particular service a lot of time, so it can complete tomorrow at 11 p.m. So it's got quite a bit of slack time. So it gives you an idea of how much time is left to be able to perform actions to help that service complete correctly. So now the latest refresh, we show that this last job, this job prepare report has ended. And if we go back to our service viewpoint, we can see now that this job, again, didn't affect the service. This one did, this prepare report. And so we can then take actions based upon that. And we've got different views again here in the service viewpoint that help us analyze this at a deeper level. So I'll go ahead and just set this one to OK. And we talked also about users that maybe don't have Control-M installed on their client. So we've given a web user interface. In this particular case, I've got the web server started. It's on this particular host, the CTM QProd host, going to that port /BIM. So that's the URL to get to this. And we can go ahead and log in here, and we're going to see something very similar to what we saw in the service monitor in the GUI. We just don't have all the same capabilities. We can take a look at some of the details as why the service is having issues, in this, again, the job failure on the path. And we can take a look at the deadline and update that if we want from the web UI here. It's not meant to replace It's meant to just give a view for those people who don't have access to Control-M directly. For those of you who have self-service then, again, we have the user interface for, pardon me, for self-service. It's going to show self-service services, a different kind of service, not really part of this discussion here, but also BIM services. And again, it lets us, gives us a different way. This type of interface is in the future going to be the only web UI that we're going to use. So I just wanted to show this real quickly. But again, you can do, if I double click on the service, it opens up a different tab, gives us again information about the service, lets us see here's the BIM job, here's all the different jobs that are just regular jobs part of the service. And you know, if need be, we could right-click on the job and rerun it. So it's has a little more capabilities than the default BIM user interface, but something that's well worth noting to take a look at. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the slide presentation, and we can go ahead and continue on from there. From a support perspective, one of the main things that I know you guys hear us talk about a lot, but it really is truly important, is being able to have the latest fix pack installed. It's very important. Any different items that are issues or things that might be going on with the service, you always want to have the latest fix pack. That's very often we'll see somebody who doesn't have the latest fix pack, and we'll just say install that. That fixes their exact problem. One of the things in the business analysis viewpoint that is very useful is what's called what-if scenarios. And in that viewpoint, at the bottom right, you could right-click and define a different kind of scenario. So if you knew that a job had failed, you didn't necessarily want to set the job okay or deal with the job, but you wanted to see what the effect would be if we, say, for example, just skipped the job. So I could run a what-if scenario in that business analysis viewpoint, skip the job, it will refresh the viewpoint, show you exactly what would happen if we skipped that job, or if we added a condition, or if we changed a resource without actually doing it. So very good tool for being able to help troubleshoot services. Sometimes we get what people think are false alerts. One of the most common situations here is when a job within the service maybe adds a condition and then another job very quickly deletes it. Again, as we discussed earlier, one of the assumptions is relating to conditions. And so if BIM doesn't see that a condition exists, then its assumption is that that job is not going to run. So this is where we use another, or we use a rule and define for that job that deletes the condition that as an exception we don't want to delete it. And so that allows the service to not alert or in the monitor show that there are that service is going to be late for some reason. Similarly with confirmation jobs, we saw that again, that we see this fairly often in you get more complex services with hundreds of jobs. A job gets introduced or has a confirmation that makes the service late, and so creating a rule for that helps that type of situation where there's this alert that seems to be false. And then another common one is the greater than sign in the to-time field. So in some of the earlier fix packs, that created a problem with some of the BIM calculations as to when a job might end. So again, having that latest fix pack installed is really going to guarantee that we bypass some of these potential items that might come up. you can always remove that from the job if it's applicable, but sometimes we can't. Daylight savings time, this typically only affects mainframe data centers. Mainframe, sometimes the way it calculates the end time of a job can be affected by how MBS, how the ZOS data center calculates that. So one of the things that we have the ability to do, starting with version 700 FixPack 3, was to change the data center definition so that we let Enterprise Manager be the one that determines when daylight savings time is. That way, BIM doesn't then potentially miscalculate it. Version 8 doesn't have this problem. Well, it doesn't have, there are different parameters that we might have set up in earlier versions, but just be aware that version 8 handles daylight savings time better for mainframe data centers, and then again, some of the newer fixed packs with version 7 and earlier. Sometimes there are services that are simply too complex that we may not be able to determine quickly or right on the spot what issues might be arising. So what support will ask you to do is manually export the Enterprise Manager database when the problem is occurring. That way we can take it back to our lab and import it into our database, run through it just and see where there might be a problem. Also, in addition to that export file, what we would want to see is if you right-click in the business analysis viewpoint, you can right-click on the job and select projection, and it'll show you information about what BIM is projecting for that job, and we would just want to see that screenshot. Okay, so moving along to some of the new features. Version 8 FixPack 3, FixPack 2 is out now. FixPack 3 will be out, should be out later this year, potentially early next year. We're introducing what we call an ad hoc service. So it allows you, even if you don't have a BIM job set up, I can still leverage Batch Impact Manager to be able to effectively on the fly create a service and see what it looks like, again with no BIM job created. So in just a regular viewpoint, I could highlight a job, I could highlight a table, and there will be an option up in the ribbon bar and should be on the be able to right click on it too. It says ad hoc service, and so it'll open a new business service analysis viewpoint and treat that as if it were an actual BIM service, again, even though there's not a BIM service job created at the end. So very helpful to do something more on the fly, more dynamic than having to create jobs and create your own services. And then finally with version 7, FixPack 6, which is out now, again, version 8 FixPack 3 is not just out yet. I mentioned earlier about manually creating an export of the database. We've introduced a feature. It's not published, so if sometimes a service might have be late, say at midnight when nobody's in the office, or you're not able to get an export of the database. So we've created this auto export feature in the configuration manager. You can right click on the BIMServer and select control shell and type in auto_export in caps and click apply, and you'll see a usage panel for that. What that allows us to do is if BIM detects that a service is going to be late or in some other way we need to analyze it, we'll automatically export the Enterprise Manager database either as a whole or just, there are different options that we can that we would advise you on to auto export the database. That way you can just send us the information without having to have somebody there to manually export the database. Again, these services get to be very complex, and so it's not always apparent with a lot of jobs, and so this feature kind of allows us to get information automatically for you. All right. Well, definitely wanted to thank you very much for, again, taking time out of your busy day. I know sometimes it can be difficult to spend some time, but hopefully you found some of this valuable and useful for, again, some of the basics of what BIM does. For the next webinar, it's going to be happening on November 13th. We're going to get into some advanced topics with the control module for SAP. If you want to view some of the past recordings, you can go ahead and connect up to the on-demand link here. I'm also going to show another slide just right here at the very end with all the other webinars that took place. At the end, as you disconnect here, once we're done with the session, you're going to be getting a survey. Definitely would like to hear your feedback on both this session and about future topics, what we can do better, what are the things we can do to help you in some webinars like this. We also encourage you to follow Control M on Twitter, Facebook, the BMC communities. Again, thank you for attending, and I see there's already some questions out there, so we'll go ahead and get to those. I do want to go one slide more, and again, this is a link, or I'm sorry, this is information about the specific past webinars that have taken place. So you can also go to that on-demand link that was I showed you earlier, or you can go ahead and go to this YouTube link. There's the Control M webinars as well as other very useful Control M related videos on YouTube that can certainly hopefully help you out. Thanks everybody and have a great day.